The 1980s promised us the future, but some visions were apparently too intense for audiences to handle. This was the decade of excess, of pushing boundaries, of special effects breakthroughs, and bold storytelling. Yet behind the neon glow and synthesizer soundtracks, a quieter war was being waged in editing rooms and ratings board meetings across the world. Today, we're diving deep into 15 science fiction films that faced the censor's blade, not always for the reasons you'd expect. These are stories of artistic ambition meeting commercial anxiety, where the cuts tell us as much about society's fears as the films themselves. Some were sliced for violence, others for ideas. Some frightened children, while others challenged adults. Each represents a moment when cinema got too close to something raw, something real, something dangerous. What you're about to discover isn't just film history. It's a map of cultural anxiety, a catalog of the things that made authorities nervous enough to take action. Let's roll the forbidden footage. Number 15. The Day Time Ended, 1980. We're starting with a film that barely survived its own birth. Picture this. A surreal cosmic encounter gets transformed into something utterly unrecognizable. The original version embraced experimental storytelling with minimal dialogue and dreamlike imagery that pushed boundaries of what mainstream science fiction could be. The filmmaker envisioned something closer to experimental art cinema, a visual poem about humanity's encounter with forces beyond comprehension. But nervous distributors saw test audiences walking out confused, and panic set in. They carved out approximately 20 minutes of the most abstract material, desperate to create traditional narrative structure where none was intended. Scenes of otherworldly phenomena unfolding without explanation were deemed too inaccessible. The ethereal quality that made the film unique became its commercial death sentence. What audiences ultimately received was a fractured experience, like viewing a puzzle with crucial pieces removed. Characters react to events we never see. Plot threads emerge from nowhere. The pacing lurches awkwardly where scenes were extracted. The filmmaker envisioned something transcendent. The studio delivered confusion. Ironically, in trying to make the film more comprehensible, they created something far more baffling. It stands as a cautionary tale about what happens when distributors try to force experimental art into commercial boxes. Number 14. Inseminoid, 1981. British horror met intergalactic terror in this controversial production, alternatively titled Horror Planet in various markets. The visceral content sparked international debate, with various countries demanding significant edits, some removing over 5 minutes of footage. The central scenario involving alien interference with human biology was presented with a graphic intensity that authorities found excessive. The UK nearly classified it among the infamous video nasties, those films deemed so dangerous that merely possessing them could be criminal. The subsequent rampage sequences, dripping with practical gore effects, faced particular scrutiny. Different territories released wildly different versions, creating a situation where the film's reputation varied dramatically depending on where you lived. While critics dismissed it as derivative exploitation, attempting to capitalize on more successful alien invasion films, its forbidden status transformed it into a collector's obsession. Genre enthusiasts sought out the most complete versions, trading information about which country's release was least censored. Sometimes notoriety becomes its own form of immortality. The film lives on not because of its quality, but because of the battle fought over it. Number 13. The Beast Within, 1982. Practical effects wizardry created a transformation sequence so anatomically convincing that ratings boards physically recoiled watching it. The effects team had studied medical texts and worked with consultants to make the metamorphosis as realistic as possible, perhaps too realistic. Bones don't just crack, they splinter and protrude. Skin doesn't just stretch, it tears and reforms. The theatrical version shortened this centerpiece considerably, a metamorphosis involving skeletal restructuring and physical agony, to avoid overwhelming viewers and secure a commercially viable rating. This wasn't gratuitous spectacle, it was the emotional core, representing humanity's painful erasure under monstrous transformation. The horror wasn't just visual, but existential, watching a person cease to be themselves. The truncated version still impresses with its technical achievement, but the complete sequence remains a testament to effects artistry that society deemed too powerful for mainstream consumption. What's lost in the cuts is the full weight of tragedy, the extended suffering that makes the transformation meaningful rather than merely shocking. The censors saw only the surface horror and missed the deeper human story being told through twisted flesh and broken bones. Number 12. Mutant, 1984. Sometimes censorship targets ideas rather than images, and this small-town thriller learned that lesson harshly. The film wanted to be a parable about environmental catastrophe, chemical irresponsibility, and the impossibility of escape. Its original conclusion suggested nationwide catastrophe with zero hope for survivors. A downbeat finale that distributors absolutely could not stomach. They didn't just trim this ending, they literally reshot it, grafting on false optimism that contradicted everything that came before. Characters who should logically be doomed suddenly find salvation. The toxic threat that was established as unstoppable gets stopped. It's a tonal whiplash that undermines the entire film's premise. Additional edits softened the environmental horror elements, reducing the visceral impact of the chemical contamination creating the threat. Scenes showing the sludge's effects were deemed too disturbing, too realistic in their depiction of industrial poison. The message about chemical contamination and inevitable consequences was deemed too bleak for audiences seeking entertainment. This proves that hopelessness itself can be controversial, that sometimes the most dangerous thing a film can suggest is that we might not be able to fix our mistakes. In the Reagan-era optimism of the early 80s, such nihilism was commercially unacceptable. The film wanted to warn, distributors wanted to comfort. Number 11. Android, 1982. This thoughtful production featuring a young Klaus Kinski in an unusual role faced a different kind of censorship, intellectual rather than visual. International distributors detected uncomfortable parallels in its storyline about artificial beings created, exploited for labor, and disposed of when no longer useful. The film's dialogue examining power dynamics between creator and created, master and servant, drew too close to real-world labor issues and historical atrocities for some distributors' comfort. Conversations about consciousness, rights, and autonomy disappeared in certain versions. The android's growing awareness of its exploitation was seen as potentially inflammatory. Even more ironically, sequences showing the android learning about humanity through classic cinema, the film's emotional foundation and most touching element, were trimmed for pacing. These moments of innocent discovery of an artificial being trying to understand love and connection through flickering images were deemed expendable. Censors attacked the subtext rather than explicit content, dulling a sharp critique of exploitation through their own exploitative editing. The film asked questions about who deserves freedom and dignity. The answer from censors was clear. Such questions were too dangerous to fully explore. It's a case study in how ideas can threaten more than images ever could. Number 10. The Final Terror, 1983. Raw intensity defined this forest-set thriller, featuring actors who would later become major stars. Before they were famous, they were running through woods in what wanted to be an unflinchingly brutal survival horror experience. The extended sequences of cat-and-mouse terror proved too unrelenting for distributors seeking commercial viability. The antagonists' trap mechanisms and their consequences underwent significant shortening to achieve marketable ratings. What made these sequences effective was their length, the prolonged tension and inevitable payoff. Cut them down, and you lose the suffocating dread, the feeling that there's no escape. One particularly cruel vine-based sequence became infamous for its cuts. The full version reportedly showed the mechanism in extended, agonizing detail. The truncated version barely registers. Multiply this across the entire runtime, and you get a film stripped of its primary weapon, sustained terror. The video release emerged heavily sanitized, its gritty atmosphere polished away into something more palatable, but far less effective. Independent genre power often couldn't survive the commercial grinder. The film exists in a twilight state, successful enough to be remembered, censored enough to be diminished. Somewhere there's a version of this film that truly earns its reputation. Number 9. Space Raiders, 1983. Roger Corman's space adventure encountered unexpected censorship. It frightened its intended young audience too effectively. This seems almost quaint now, but test screenings revealed that intense battle sequences and villainous menace overwhelmed children. The film was marketed as family-friendly space opera fun, but delivered something darker and more intense. Corman, ever the pragmatic producer, ordered cuts to lighten both action and antagonist. Space battles were shortened, removing prolonged sequences of ship destruction. The villain's most menacing moments were softened or removed entirely. What remained was less frightening, but also less dramatically effective. Budget considerations led to removing exposition and character development, accelerating pace at narrative coherence's expense. In trying to fix the scariness problem, they created a confusion problem. Scenes that would have explained character motivations disappeared, leaving viewers wondering why people were doing things. This represents market forces performing surgery on the film's identity, proving censorship wears many faces. Sometimes it's not moral guardians with scissors, but producers watching focus groups and making commercial calculations. The result is the same, a film that isn't what its creators intended. Space Raiders wanted to be thrilling. It became merely hectic. Number 8. The Black Hole, 1979. Disney's ambitious darkness created internal panic, a studio censoring itself out of fear of its own creation. The original climax presented a psychedelic descent into hellish realms complete with tortured imagery and religious symbolism that pushed far beyond typical Disney fare. This was cosmic horror wearing a family-friendly studio's logo. Studio executives, alarmed by this dramatic brand departure, demanded substantial edits. They shortened and softened the infernal sequence, blurring its explicit connections to religious concepts of damnation. What remained is brief and confusing rather than extended and terrifying. The villain's fate underwent alteration from its more graphically symbolic original, where the implications were far more disturbing. These cuts produced the notoriously abrupt conclusion that has puzzled audiences for decades. The film builds towards something momentous, then seems to stumble across the finish line. The tonal whiplash is jarring. You can feel the missing material in the awkward editing, the way scenes don't quite connect. This represents corporate, self-preservation trumping artistic vision. Disney wanted to experiment with darker material but couldn't commit when faced with the actual result. The Black Hole exists as a fascinating failure, a glimpse of what could have been if the studio had trusted its own ambition. Instead, they blinked, and the film suffered permanently. Number 7. Night of the Comet, 1984. This beloved cult film underwent subtle but significant modification that changed its entire emotional landscape. Initial concepts presented a devastated world with haunting emptiness following civilization's end. The script envisioned extended scenes of desolate urban landscapes, of survivors wandering through silent cities, processing the psychological weight of being among the last humans alive. These scenes of contemplative loneliness were trimmed for pacing and tone. Distributors preferred energetic fun over melancholic meditation. The film should be zippy, not depressing. Shopping mall sequences and radio station adventures stayed. Quiet moments of grief largely disappeared. What we lose is the full weight of apocalypse, the sense of profound loss that should accompany such devastation. The characters bounce back remarkably quickly from witnessing the end of the world. The film we cherish is wonderful, full of charm and humor and heart. Yet it's a brighter version of a more melancholic story about loss and survival, about what it means to continue when everything you knew is dust. The censorship here wasn't about protecting viewers from violence or sexuality, but from sadness, from the emotional honesty of grief. Apparently, that was too much for a commercial release. Keep it light. Keep it moving. Don't let audiences feel the weight. It's a different kind of artistic compromise, one that values entertainment over emotional truth. Number 6. The Last Battle, 1983. Luc Besson's striking debut, black and white and wordless, represented bold artistic risk that many territories couldn't accept intact. This post-apocalyptic tale was a visual marvel, telling its story through images and sound design alone, but the content behind that style was brutal. Post-apocalyptic violence rendered with stark realism faced cuts worldwide. The film's primal despair, its vision of humanity reduced to base survival instincts, proved too much for distributors expecting conventional entertainment. The most brutal confrontations, shot with unflinching clarity, were shortened significantly. Besson wasn't interested in stylized action, he wanted visceral reality. The ambiguous resolution, open-ended and philosophically rich, was softened in some versions to inject a sliver of hopefulness. Besson crafted a vision of complete cultural collapse, a world where language itself has been lost. Distributors attempted to make it more palatable, compromising its unique, devastating impact. Some territories even tried adding sound effects or narration to make it more accessible, completely missing that the silence was the point. The film's power comes from its restraint, its trust in visual storytelling. When you modify that, you don't just alter the film, you fundamentally misunderstand it. Besson's artistic statement became a commercial product, diluted in the translation. Number 5. The Dead Zone, 1983. David Cronenberg's adaptation of Stephen King's novel faced political rather than content-based pressure, proving that sometimes the scariest thing isn't monsters, but mirrors. The climax involves the protagonist attempting to stop a dangerous rising politician through extreme action, a storyline that generated studio nervousness during the tense political climate of the 1980s. While major cuts didn't ultimately occur, enormous pressure existed to modify the ending, to soften its implications. The scenario hit too close to real anxieties about political extremism and what desperate citizens might do about it. Studio executives worried about controversy, about being seen as endorsing violence against political figures. Cronenberg fought hard to preserve the story's relevance and dangerous edge. He understood that the film's power came from its willingness to engage seriously with difficult moral questions. What do you do when the democratic system is about to elevate someone genuinely dangerous? How far is too far? The result is powerful and uncompromising, yet it exists alongside what might have been even more pointed commentary on power and paranoia. The shadow of potential censorship shaped every decision. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective censorship is the threat of it, the way creators self-edit, knowing what might happen if they push too far. The film we got is remarkable. The film that might have been remains unknown. Number 4. The Quiet Earth, 1985. This New Zealand philosophical piece encountered censorship of maturity and ambiguity, two things commercial distributors apparently feared. Themes of isolation naturally explore human connection and power in profound ways. When you strip away society, what remains? How do people relate without rules? International distributors trimmed complex interpersonal scenes they found too provocative or deliberately paced. The film wanted to sit with its characters, to explore their psychology deeply. Distributors wanted forward momentum. Slow character development became expendable in favor of plot progression. The legendary final image, one of cinema's most remarkable and debated shots, nearly faced alteration by producers demanding clarity over mystery. They wanted explanation, resolution, certainty. The director wanted questions, ambiguity, interpretive freedom. It's a fundamental disagreement about what cinema should do. This represented censorship of adult complexity in favor of simplification. The assumption seemed to be that audiences couldn't handle or wouldn't accept philosophical ambiguity. Better to spell everything out, to provide concrete answers even if they diminish the material. The Quiet Earth survived more intact than many films on this list, but the pressure to conform nearly destroyed its most essential elements. Number 3. The Dungeon Master, 1984. 7 directors creating anthology segments produced tonal chaos before Censors even arrived. This was ambitious in concept, a fantasy adventure told through different creative visions, but challenging to execute coherently. Then Censors made everything worse. One segment featuring elaborate stop-motion creatures and darker thematic content received particular attention. The visuals were intense, the storyline surprisingly grim for what was marketed as adventure entertainment. These sequences faced cuts for both their imagery and their unsettling implications. Connecting narrative segments that explained the overall plot structure disappeared to reduce runtime. When you're already dealing with 7 different directing styles and tones, removing the connective tissue is catastrophic. The result transformed manageable confusion into complete incoherence. Multiple contradictory versions emerged in different markets, none representing the complete vision. Some versions were missing entire segments. Others had different sequences in different orders. This demonstrates how targeted censorship can collapse entire structures, how removing specific elements can destroy something's fundamental integrity. The Dungeon Master became notorious not just for being strange, but for being incomprehensible in a way that felt broken rather than intentional. It's impossible to evaluate what the film might have been because no complete version was widely seen. Somewhere in the fragments is an ambitious experiment. What reached audiences was a legendary mess. Number 2. The Visitor, 1979. This Italian-American cosmic oddity starring John Huston faced cuts for incomprehensibility and theological alarm, a rare double threat. Ancient cosmic entities, dangerous children with supernatural abilities, and overwhelming symbolic imagery created something genuinely unnerving and genuinely baffling. Distributors across multiple countries independently decided to remove elements they found confusing, frightening, or controversial. The problem was that different territories cut different things, and the film was already deliberately surreal. Post-production panic contributed to chaotic editing as various interests fought over the final product. Some markets removed scenes with religious implications. Others cut moments of violence or supernatural power. The cumulative effect was devastating. Most viewers encountered a gutted sequence of shocking imagery, barely holding a narrative thread together. Plot became suggestion, coherence became optional. Attempting to censor the visitor resembles organizing a hurricane. You just get weaker chaos. The film's power came from its overwhelming intensity, its refusal to explain itself clearly. When you start cutting for clarity, you're working against the fundamental nature of the material. What remains is still strange, still unsettling, but diminished. You can sense the original vision beneath the surface, struggling to break through the cuts. Number 1. Liquid Sky, 1982. The ultimate censored artifact of 1980s independent cinema and the purest example of a film being rejected for its entire existence. Set in New Wave culture, featuring alien observers studying human intimacy and featuring controversial content, including a notorious sequence where intimate encounters become fatal. This film faced outright bans in multiple countries and heavy editing elsewhere. But the censorship extended far beyond specific controversial scenes. Authorities attacked the film's entire worldview, its punk ethos, its fluid exploration of identity and relationships, its aggressive anti-establishment stance. This wasn't just a movie that needed a few scenes trimmed. This was cinema that fundamentally challenged social norms. The film's depiction of underground culture, substance use, and alternative lifestyles made mainstream distributors deeply uncomfortable. Its refusal to moralize or provide conventional character arcs violated expected storytelling rules. The visual style itself, harsh, alienating, deliberately ugly at times, seemed designed to repel conventional audiences. Critics polarized violently. Censors fought relentlessly. Some called it groundbreaking art. Others dismissed it as unwatchable garbage. The ratings board couldn't find a comfortable category. It was too explicit for mainstream release, too weird for art house comfort, too confrontational to ignore. The film became legendary precisely because authorities tried erasing it. The censorship became part of its identity, proof of its transgressive power. Liquid Sky wasn't just cinema. It was rebellion captured on celluloid, and the establishment's response proved how genuinely dangerous different could be. It represents the peak of 1980s cultural tension, when the future was arriving too fast and too strange for comfort. Every cut, every ban, every controversy made it more powerful. This is what happens when you try to suppress something truly original. You can't destroy it. You can only make it immortal. Which revelation surprised you most? Did censors protect audiences or destroy art? Were these cuts justified protection or cultural vandalism? Consider this modern question. Streaming platforms use algorithms and content warnings today. Is this just modern censorship with better marketing? Are we preventing the next generation of bold, weird, dangerous cinema from ever existing? Have we traded scissors for code, but kept the same fear of things that challenge us? The tools change. The impulse remains. Every generation finds new ways to decide what's too much, what's too far, what's too dangerous for people to see. We congratulate ourselves on being more enlightened than the past, but are we? Or have we simply become more sophisticated in our methods of control? These 15 films prove that sometimes the most important art is the kind that makes people uncomfortable, that pushes boundaries, that refuses to behave. The censored cuts tell us what society feared. The films themselves show us what artists dared.